I really don't think any of this FUD really matters. The FUD only really matters to the traders and their local noise. Long term, it's always the holders that determine the price.
Hello and welcome back to the CoinStories podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brunell, and we are talking to some of the leading voices in Bitcoin, their backstories, how they were first introduced to Bitcoin, and their take on what the cryptocurrency offers. I'm so excited to share my guest today is Bitcoin advocate, developer, educator, and author Jimmy Song. Jimmy has been contributing to open source Bitcoin projects since about 2013 and has written several books on the digital asset and its underlying technology, including The Little Bitcoin Book and Programming Bitcoin. He argues that the blockchain's sole use case is for sound money, aka Bitcoin, and he is a vocal critic of altcoins. Jimmy is well known for his iconic cowboy hat, and he'll share how that hat symbolizes the hope and opportunity Bitcoin offers. Here's Jimmy. All right, Jimmy, thank you so much for joining me. Super excited to chat with you. And the first place I just want to start is your origin story. So I read that you're from South Korea. So tell me a little bit about, what you remember from being in Korea. I know you were young when you came here, 7 years old. So let's take it all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, I that's where I grew up. So I don't know what it would be like for it to be different, because that's all I know. But yeah, I grew up in Korea. I went to first and second grade there, and basically came up to the States because my dad was being posted in New York. So he worked for a textile manufacturer at the time, which was very popular to do in Korea. Except all the designers happened to be in New York, and they would want to know, hey, like, what are the fabrics that your factory is going to produce? What are they going to feel like, sound like, look like, whatever. So it was important that, they had somebody in New York. And so they posted him in New York. I still remember he had an office on the 66th floor of the Empire State Building, right next to the Diamond Exchange, which I didn't know anything about at the time, but turns out to be like kind of a significant cultural landmark.
Yeah.
And basically, that's where he worked, and he had a bunch of clothes samples and whatnot there, and he would meet with whatever representatives of various clothing companies that wanted something manufactured in Korea. He would meet with them. So that was in the 80s, and he was posted in New York for 5 years, and we were supposed to go back. But my parents thought that we would have a better education, better opportunities, better everything if we just stayed in the U.S. So having just gotten his green card, he decided to quit, and he went and started his own business. And we've basically been here ever since. But yeah, the whole I came basically because of the way the school year works in Korea versus here. I had just finished second grade, and then I was put into like sort of the middle of third grade. So the way school years work in Korea is that it goes from, January to January, something like that. In the U.S., it goes from September to June, something like that. So I got dropped in the middle of third grade,
Oh, wow.
and I didn't really know English, so I had to learn pretty quickly. But when you're that young, it's very easy to pick up languages or whatever. So a year later, I had forgotten a lot of my Korean, which is kind of sad. I wish I had it, but I speak like a second grader pretty much whenever I go back. So
They didn't put you in Korean school or anything like that? Because I relate to you because I was 5 when we came here from Poland, and my mom wanted to sign me up for Polish school so that I could keep, the language going. But, it's so hard to remember that time because I was so young, so not all the memories really stuck. But how much do you remember of just that time of coming to a new country and learning, hey, things are a little different here. I have to learn a whole new language.
I remember it very vividly because it was kind of a traumatic event, right? Like it's the first plane ride I was ever on, and it was like 19 hours from Seoul to New York. That's a very long plane ride.
Yeah.
And it was extremely boring. It's not like today where you have like video games and stuff,
Yeah.
or even videos. The best we had was some radio, and I the radio was all like English songs. I couldn't understand them or anything. So, imagine being like an 8-year-old boy, like being stuck on a plane for 19 hours. It wasn't fun.
Yeah.
Um, Also, my parents decided to just sort of show me around the first week that we were in the U.S. And we went into Manhattan, and if you remember Manhattan back in the 80s, it wasn't a great place.
No.
So there were all these like squeegee men and stuff like that. Still remember that. Everything was kind of dirty, and you had to. There was like one Korean restaurant in all of New York City, and
No
it's
way.
still where all the Korean store restaurants are now, which is basically K-Town. It started really with like one restaurant there, so we were just so excited to be able to eat there.
Wow.
I also had I had pizza the first time like ever back back during that first week, and I remember thinking, this is disgusting. This is
No way.
I was like, what is this thing? I hadn't really ever eaten cheese,
Yeah.
so I didn't know what it was. Of course, later on, I ate way too much of it. But culturally, it was a really big shock. But thankfully, like I was young enough that I was able to adapt to it. And yeah, it became later on, I guess, a way to sort of see everything from a weird third party perspective, because I'm not really American, not really Korean.
Yeah.
I'm something in between.
I feel you.
Having sort of that objective perspective on certain cultural things, which a lot of people don't really recognize, I think has been pretty valuable for me.
Well, and what was it like just growing up in terms of money and your socioeconomic background? Because I'm sure that informed later on your thoughts about money and Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, we were just normal middle class folks. I mean, my parents being Asian, they were very much emphasizing education, so
Sure.
we kept moving so that we got into better and better school districts. And that's like that was for them sort of like making it was being a professional of some kind instead of having to run your own business. Little did they know that I actually think running your own business is the more noble thing to do rather than being a lawyer or something like that. So but that was what they wanted for me. But I think I knew fairly early on, like I didn't want to do well. I just, like, teachers hate me. Like every single teacher I've had, like they just hate me because I tend to be a smart ass, and like especially like math classes, I would just fall asleep. I'd read everything ahead of time, and I would just like play video games during the evening and like not go to sleep till like 2 or 3 in the morning. And then when I got to school, I would just sleep. And then if the teacher would call on me, I'd be like, oh, okay, let me see. Yeah, and give the answer. And like couldn't do anything about it. Just went right back to sleep. So a lot of teachers just didn't like me very much. And as a result, I feel like I should have gotten better grades for the amount of knowledge that I gained, but I didn't get very good grades. But because I went to a very good school district, I did manage to go to a pretty good school and did all of that. But yeah, I've never been sort of like a guy that fits into any sort of like system like that, or like follows the rules very well. Like, a lot of people in Bitcoin are a similar way where, it's like, don't tell me what to do. That's like the absolute worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Is telling me what to do.
So when you were that young, did you think about what you wanted to be? I mean, clearly math and stuff came easily to you, but it also seems like you maybe wanted a different path. So what were you wanting to do back then?
I think for a long time, I wanted to be a math professor. So I that's always something that I've really loved. And it's something that I've been drawn to for a very long time. And I knew I was good at it fairly early on. And, I did a lot of like math competitions and stuff like that in high school.
Oh, yeah?
Like, that's pretty cool, pretty fun. Yeah. Won some money, whatever. But I went to college. I majored in math so I could go to grad school and get a PhD or whatever. But like towards my senior year, I studied abroad in Budapest for a semester.
Oh, wow.
And it was a study abroad program specifically for math majors. and you got to interact with a lot of really, really good mathematicians. And Hungary is known for its mathematicians. They get way more per capita than any other country, pretty much.
Really?
Some very famous mathematicians have come out of there. So I, like just hanging out with some of my professors, talking to them about what like being a professor was like. I was just like, it sounds kind of like a lonely endeavor. You do get to interact and stuff, but I knew myself well enough at the time to know that I'm an extreme extrovert and I need to like interact with a lot more people. So I abandoned that career path, having thought about it for a very long time, and then instead I went into programming and startups and all that stuff, which of course, like I've had an affinity towards too. I got my first computer as a 9-year-old, like a year after I came to the U.S.
Oh,
And I
wow.
begged my dad. Yeah, it was a Commodore 16. I didn't even know what a computer was. I was like, I just have to have this. I don't. It's supposed to compute stuff or something. I don't know what it is, but I know I want to play with it. I know I want to hang it. Try to build
Yeah.
stuff with it. And that's what I ended up doing. And I had a couple of other computers, one in middle school, like an 8086 and a 486, 33 megahertz, which was state of the art at the time back in high school. Like I still remember all of these computers and all the programming I did and all that stuff. And ultimately that paid off because that was like my first job out of college was from a high school friend of mine who did a startup right out of college, and he had hired like uh, you know 4 of his fellow classmates from Harvard. I was the only non-Harvard guy there. Like I think not for the only non-Ivy League guy for like the first like 15 hires or something.
Wait, where did you go
Um,
to school?
Michigan.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and then I mean, so I was in Cambridge for like the next 13 years doing startup after startup, and yeah, and then like I found Bitcoin in 2011. I guess that's where we get to the story.
Okay, well, before we get to the Bitcoin discovery, because I have questions about that, just tell me about the jobs that you had, because
Hmm.
it doesn't surprise me that you would like something more in the startup world as opposed to just math, because you're very extroverted. You clearly have
Hmm.
personality. It seems like you've got this creative side. So
Hmm.
tell me just a little bit about your career at the time, because before you discovered Bitcoin, what were you doing, and what did you think your life was gonna look like?
Yeah, so I'm a programmer. I code things. I can write things, and first job out of college was working for my high school friend, and I was employee number 6, and we got to 140 people before the dot-com crash, and like
Wow.
everything kind of fell out. I think I got caught on like the third round of layoffs or something like that, when they cut from like 95 to 29 or something like that. So I like that was like my first experience working at what was a translation startup company, and it was trying to make web pages easier to translate and things like that. um, I work for let's see, where do I work for next? I work for Lifetime Television. That's like the women's channel, and I
Really?
was helping them with their website. Yeah,
No
kind of
way.
completely random.
And so coding, was it easy for you to transition from the math to learning coding? Did you pick that up in college or at the job?
No, I've been coding since I was like 9 years old.
Oh, because of the
So
computers. Okay.
yeah. And that was like the only useful thing you could actually do with computers is program something. So
Okay.
my
Got it.
mom found me some tutors, and I was like, okay, I'll learn.
Great.
And
Okay.
it's been in my blood a long time.
Okay.
But I learned a bunch of skills at that first job, so a bunch of skills at the second job, and then the third job I think was at Athena Health, which is a
Yeah.
company that's public now. I think I was within the first couple of hundred, and then I was there long enough that the company went public. I was programming electronic health records and stuff like that, and all the complicated drug interactions and all kinds of really Like I could understand why doctors get completely frustrated. And
Yeah.
if any doctors are listening to this show, I can commiserate with your misery, because I had to code all that stuff, and I'm
Oh
like,
man.
how the hell do they do this without code? Because it's not easy. Um, so I did that for a while. Then I went to I tried to be a photographer for a little bit, and that didn't work out because that was like right during the great financial crisis. Then I went and worked at Shoe Buy. I think it's called shoes.com now, but they didn't go public while I was there, but I didn't work there very long. Then I worked for a web hosting company. Um, like I think they had like something like 30 something properties.
Wow.
They ended up going public after I left. Then I worked for another startup with a friend of mine, and we started it together. That didn't go anywhere, but that's when I first heard about Bitcoin. Then I worked for a litigation consulting firm, like writing their software, and then I moved to Austin to work for Retail Me Not, which is the online coupon
Yeah.
place. They went public while I was there. And then after that, I was like, I want to do full-time Bitcoin. So I've been doing Bitcoin.
This is fascinating. You just have like one job after the next after the next. I thought, meanwhile, you're sitting down this philosophical rabbit hole learning about Austrian economics. But okay. Well, so you discovered Bitcoin in 2011, and I heard you say on another podcast that you were on a website called Slashdot, and you had read an article that was called "Bitcoin Reaches Dollar Parity." So tell me a little bit more about that time. Like, how did you really start to think, oh, what is this Bitcoin thing?
Yeah, I mean, 2011 was a few years after 2008, and for me, 2008 was, well, I was trying to start that photography business, but it wasn't working because like no one was hiring right after the crash or whatever. So I was like, yeah, let's go look into whatever this stuff is. And I looked at the financial crisis, and okay, where's this money come from and all that stuff. So I was pretty primed at that point to understand money a little bit better than maybe other people that hadn't done that investigation. And when I found out, okay, what this is, this is how money works and stuff like that, I was of course outraged. I'm like, really, that's the system? And I was working at that startup with my friend, and this is just something I do to relax. So I go to like tech websites and okay, what's the latest on this or that or whatever. And that was the one story I read, and I was like, okay, I don't know what this means. And so I investigated it, and almost immediately when I read about the 21 million limit, I was immediately hooked, and I was like, okay, like I don't know where this is going, but if it has any legs, I better be one of the first people to get it and not one of the last. And at the time, like you needed to it was just so difficult to go get Bitcoin. I was like, okay, where can I go buy it? Where can I just like fill in a credit card or something? Nope, nowhere. The only place that I could find was like the way to do it was to get money to Mount Gox and buy it there. And Mount Gox was, of course, in Japan. And if you're a US citizen, you had to go and deposit money to another service called Dwala. And then you had to transfer money from Dwala all the way to Mount Gox. And everything took like a long time because they had to verify your bank account and then your account on Mount
Wow.
Gox and everything else. It was such a mess. And like probably one of the biggest regrets in my life, I just decided not to do it because it was so bothersome.
Yeah.
But like I had set up enough of it that later that year, when like Bitcoin went from $1 to $30 and back down, I was like, okay, all right, now's the time to buy some, and I finally bought some, and very happy that I did.
Did you buy a ton, or did you think, oh, because I've heard of so many people that bought and then it went up to a couple hundred or 1,000, they sold it all, it's gone, and then they
Yeah.
start to reaccumulate, and people's stories of just accumulating are so interesting.
Yeah, I didn't buy that much, to be honest with you, but the thing is, I didn't have to buy very much, and then it
Exactly.
started overtaking my portfolio in the years ahead. And that was always sort of like the thought with Bitcoin for me was, okay, if it works out, then I'll if this ends up being the currency, then I'm gonna have some, and that'll be good. But there's no real reason to sell it. The only reason to sell it was to maybe try some trading, which I turns out I'm really bad at. So I didn't really do that. But I mean, a lot of what I bought, like I just kind of kept, and this is true not just from 2011, but from 2013, 2014, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Like I don't like mess around and like buy and sell. Although nowadays, like if I get paid in dollars, I convert to Bitcoin, and whenever my cards come due or something like that, then I'll convert back before paying it.
So where did it go from just buying it because you thought, hey, if on an offshoot this succeeds, this will be great, to really
Mhm.
becoming so passionate about how it could change the world?
Mm.
How did you start to really learn about Bitcoin, learn maybe about Austrian economics and get more
Mhm.
passionate about it?
Yeah, I think 2013 was when I started contributing to open source projects related to Bitcoin. So as a programmer, I like getting to contribute to this stuff and like earning Bitcoin, which even back then was like back then, especially back then, it was really hard. But some guy from the Ukraine was willing to pay me some Bitcoin to work on his open source project. So I'm like, okay, I'm here. I'll help you.
Wow.
And I got paid like really well on a per hour basis. Probably some of the best money I've ever made. But yeah, he that sort of like gave me some exposure to like more skin in the game, and I started going to the Austin Bitcoin meetup at the time. Met some people, and they were talking a lot more about Austrian economics. So I started reading more Austrian economics stuff right around then, and essentially educated myself on Rothbard and Mises and Papa and all of those guys. And I don't think I fully understood what Bitcoin was back
Hmm.
then. And it wasn't until, I don't know, almost like 2017 where it really solidified. And I had read enough Austrian economics, had enough discussions about that to really understand it and be able to defend it and say, okay, here's why Bitcoin is incredibly important. And um, yeah, it was a multi-year journey. Let's just say that.
Yeah, well, I saw that you've said Bitcoin changes the base layer of civilization. What do you mean by that? And what was I guess, what were you learning about that was really convincing to you and changing how you felt about money and sort of these big picture
Mm.
societal truths?
Yeah, I think there's a Rothbard book about the Great Depression that I had read, which was absolutely fascinating because it gave like a perspective that I don't think you learn in school, which is in school it's okay. Well, there was a stock market crash and everything went to hell, and FDR rescued us. That's basically the story that everyone thinks about. Rothbard, I think, systematically takes that apart and says, okay, that's not what happened. Here's got monetary expense. Hoover spent tons and tons of money. Here's FDR, who spent tons and tons of money too, and they did it on stuff that was kind of useless, and it delayed recovery for a long time. Um, and so, like thinking about that and saying, okay, why is that? What's going on there? I really examining it. It turns out that money really is sort of like a base layer. If you screw with the money, then you screw everything else on top of it, including employment and prices, and even to some degree, like peace with your neighboring countries and things like that. So, um, reading that was pretty influential for me, and understanding what's going on. And I really do think money is sort of like that base layer, because it gives us sort of a way to relate to each other, and it gives us a lot of information about what the market wants or needs. As soon as you mess with that, you cross up all those signals, and it makes it very difficult for people to plan, to know where things might be going, and to plan for the future and so on. And it's ultimately kind of decivilizing the more you mess with the money. And the government has definitely messed with our money.
Yeah, well, I want to lean into that a little bit more because your parents saw a better life here in the US than where they came from. Same with my parents. And I think for a long time there was this sense that if you come to the United States, you can achieve the American dream. It doesn't matter what background you come from. You can move up the social ladder. You just have to work hard. It can happen. There was a lot of hope, I think, especially in the idea of coming here. And I don't know if it's just more recent. I can't even pinpoint the year where I think that's really changed, but something has clearly shifted in the US. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because coming from a different country where clearly a lot of people still do want to come to the US as opposed to being where they're from, yet we have completely eroded our monetary system and we're printing money like we've never printed before, and we're almost hanging off the edge of this cliff, but yet everyone still says, where else would you rather be? America's still the best. And, we do have a great capitalistic system. So, I mean, do you think about that ever? Because it just seems like on the one hand, America is great, but on the other hand, here we are and people are barely making it. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And it's like, wait, where are we? And how has our monetary policy affected all of this?
Yeah, the short answer is that we're kind of running out of this Ponzi scheme, basically. But the reason why people want to come to the U.S. is because of the dollar. Like ultimately, that's it. It's because the dollar is the reserve currency for the world, and if the closer you are to the money printer, the more wealth you get, sort of undeservedly. And this is why so many people want to come to the U.S., because you're going to get more money for your labor, more money for your ideas, more money for pretty much anything. Because the U.S. is the one doing the money printing. Like every other country, you're going to have to print on top of it or dilute yourselves further and suffer more consequences for doing that. And this is called the Cantillon effect. Whoever is printing the money, the first spenders get all of the benefits. So of course, people want to come to the U.S. because they can. It's not so much making it, but you just get better leverage on your time and money. The problem, though, is that that's starting to run out. We're seeing countries hyperinflate. A lot of the money is being printed and like exported to other nations. So there is still, a desire to come to the U.S. for that reason. But the dilution is getting like crazy, and like the number of people that are benefiting getting smaller and smaller. So right now, I would say, it's like investment bankers, government bureaucrats, zombie companies. Those are the main beneficiaries. Pretty much everyone else, well, maybe some tech companies and stuff like that. Pretty much everyone else, like it's kind of tough. You have to, although like it depends on how much of the Cantillon dollars that you're able to get as investors or whatever. But that's the reality of the current monetary system, is that you want the early printed dollars, and the way to get that is through moving to America, getting investment in America, and so on.
So how do you see a shift happening to more adoption of Bitcoin? Because right now, especially, I think the pandemic did a lot in terms of increasing awareness and creating an environment where people maybe could learn that, hey, what is money printing, and is it really good for me, and what is this going to cause a couple years down the road? But really, I mean, there's so much FUD, and you have all these narratives out there, from the climate argument to just, governments are not going to relinquish control, or there's going to be tax issues. I mean, how do you see it playing out where Bitcoin will, I don't know, get that momentum to really push into the mainstream and have, say, 20, 30, 40% of the population say, hey, I should put my money here?
I mean, I think to some degree that's already happening. We don't need any new narratives in order for that to happen. But the Fed's doing just fine on its own, like showing just how much willingness they have to print extra money. People are sort of opting out individually. We had Paul Tudor Jones saying, like, I have 5% in Bitcoin, I have 5% in gold, I have 5% in something else, and whatever. The rest, I have no idea what to do with. And that's like 80% of his portfolio because he doesn't like everything is kind of crazy. And this is what you get when you mess with the money is you get PE ratios that don't make any sense. You have stocks which haven't paid dividends like ever in its 30-year history and no one cares. Bonds that are yielding negative, which doesn't make any sense either. And people are willing to put money into these things, mostly because they have nowhere else to put it. So,
Yeah.
Bitcoin is like one of the few places where it actually makes sense. So, um, as it proves itself over time, I think more and more people will opt out to Bitcoin because, it's got a 200% yearly annual return. So, in its 12-year history, I guess 11 years and 10 years or so of like real price history. So I think it's going to get to a place where a lot more people are just going to come on board, on an individual by individual basis. And at some point, there will be merchants that will sort of demand Bitcoin because they would rather not hold dollars. And that's when we'll really start to see it more emerge as like a method of payment. Um, and eventually, sort of like unit of account when enough people, probably something like 30 or 40% of the population around the world, like actually prices things in Bitcoin. So, but those are all kind of like I don't know when they'll happen, but individuals are converting to it daily. So
Yeah.
I really don't think any of this FUD really matters. The FUD only really matters to the traders and their local noise. Long term, it's always the holders. It's the people that are using it as a store of value that determine the price.
So, do you think it will be more individual and sort of retail investor driven, or do you think it has to be those big companies, the investor sides, maybe corporations finally saying, hey, we believe in this, we're going to put it on our balance sheet that's going to drive more of the mass adoption?
Yeah, mass adoption by definition is retail. So I mean, I think that's been happening for a while anyway. Um, corporations will probably put some on their balance sheet, like MicroStrategy has. They're issuing convertible notes and things of that nature too. So a lot of investment vehicles will have some Bitcoin component, uh, and that'll probably affect things. But ultimately, I think it's individuals that want it. Even for an institution, there's somebody in charge that decides that this is important. So it's going to take some time. It's usually gradually, then suddenly. I don't know exactly what that looks like,
Yeah.
but at some point it'll be very sudden.
What do you think drove sort of the drop that we saw where we were in the 60s? We were, it felt like we were going to hit 70, 75 potentially. I kind of thought that by the time we hit the Bitcoin conference, we were going to maybe be at 100. But what do you think caused it to really start to go in the other direction?
I mean, this has been the case for Bitcoin for a long time. Like, you'll just sort of see inexplicable rises, inexplicable drops, and things of that nature, and that's happened all throughout Bitcoin's history. It's part of not having a central bank. If we had a central bank, they could manage the price and make sure that they buy when it's too low and sell when it's too high to manage
Yeah.
the ratios and prices the right way and so on. But Bitcoin doesn't have a central bank. That means that it's going to be a little more volatile, and you have a lot of traders that like sort of playing the momentum and wrecking each other with leverage and things like that. So that's where I see this continuing. You did have a drop, but that's not abnormal. And it's does that mean that we have to go back up to that point like within the next 3 months or something like that? I mean, maybe, but maybe not. Like these are questions about market sentiment, and they
Yeah.
tend to be very volatile as it is. It could be news that does that, but as far as like I know, the traders that trade tend to do so on like a technical analysis kind of way. So if there's enough momentum and the right indicators and so on, that's when they pile in, and you get crazy bull runs. But the other way can happen as well, like it just did, where just piles on, piles on, piles on,
Yeah.
and you get to what 28,000, something like that. Yeah.
So I'm assuming that you believe that Bitcoin will become a global reserve currency. And
Mm.
I'm just kind of curious with now all these countries talking about digital currencies and the United States talking about Fed coin. How do you see sort of the interplay between new digital currencies and Bitcoin? And do you see Bitcoin kind of taking over? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, digital currencies and Bitcoin don't really have much to do with each other. They like supposedly use blockchain or something like that, but really, as far as I'm concerned, they're not anything alike because it's clearly centrally
Mm-hmm.
controlled and
Yeah.
by a government, and you have no say over the monetary policy, and that's entirely up to the central bank to do so. Um, so I mean, my take on digital currencies is that they're a way to cut out like multiple layers of banks. So right now, you have the Federal Reserve, which can print some money and lend it out to commercial banks who use that as a reserve to lend out some more money. Um, and you have residential banks and mortgage banks and things that'll also borrow and lend out and so on. It's a mechanism for expanding the money supply, but it's not that precise, and it makes it harder because it's not at one layer. You have to go out many layers and surveil everything, which is why they have AML KYC laws where they force the banks to do all of the reporting, and then they now have a central database of all the financial transactions that have happened. If you have a CBDC, then what you can do is cut all of that out. And I think that's China's plan, is to cut out commercial banks, retail banks, and so on, and make it so that they are the one bank in China. That's it. No other banks. And that makes it super efficient, much easier to surveil everything, much easier to know exactly how much money there is, and their ability to expand it, or contract it if necessary, to manage the economy, and cut off access for people that they don't like, and so on. So I think it's a lot more likely to happen in a place like China, not so much in the US, because I think commercial banks and so on have too much lobbying power, and they're not likely to want to be, middled out or whatever as a result of CBDCs.
Well, as the kid of Asian immigrant parents, what did they think when you got into Bitcoin? Did they think it was a little bit risky? Maybe you shouldn't go down that path?
Oh, I mean, I've been doing startups for a while, so for them, I don't think it was a big deal. Like, I think I proved to them that I can go to a startup and make money, and yeah, the company going public, that's like, oh,
Yeah,
okay, all right, that's a legit thing. So,
got it.
but when I got into Bitcoin, I told them to go buy some. They didn't really understand it, and I think thankfully they understand it a lot better now. But it took many years for them to really get what the heck I did for a living.
So what made you decide to really devote your life and career to Bitcoin? How did that transition happen? Because all of a sudden you're working for wallet companies, right? Blockchain companies. How did you transition to being this Bitcoin, not just advocate, but educator and professional?
Yeah, so 2017, like early 2017, nobody knew who I was. I had less than 300 followers on Twitter, and I was working for Paxos at the time. And one of the content people at Paxos asked me to write a blog post. So I did. It got some good feedback. They put it up on the website. It worked out. So I was like, all right, well, let me try to write another one. And I wanted to write about SegWit and doubling the block size, which was a big deal at the time in Bitcoin. And I wrote this long article, and I handed it in, and the content guy said, "This is too Bitcoin focused. I don't think we can publish that." I was like,
Ah,
"What? All right, fine." So what do I do? I was like, "Okay." I offered it around to some of my friends and asked if they would want to publish it on their blog, and they were like, "No." So I decided to start my own Medium blog, posted that article, and my instinct was right. Like a lot of people read it, and it
Wow.
ended up. I think Jameson Lopp, ended up like quoting it in one of his pieces and stuff. So I started getting some followers as a result. So I wrote another article the next week, another article the next week, and I started sort of being sort of the guy, technical that guy that can explain what's going on and show people, okay, here's what. Yeah, and there really wasn't that much of that at the time. Then I got invited onto a couple of YouTube shows to explain what all of that was.
And so, what was the crux of it? You were kind of explaining and breaking down what Bitcoin was, or was it more of sort of the philosophy behind it, or the monetary policy or economics?
Well, it was a lot more practical. It was SegWit versus 2x. So
Uh,
it was just okay. There's this controversial hard fork that everyone in the Bitcoin space has been
yeah,
arguing about. I was just saying, okay, here's what it is, and here's what
got it.
what this other thing is, and there was a lot of news to sort of like catch people up on and explain. Okay, all right. Greg Maxwell comes out with this accusation about ASIC boost. I'm like, okay, here's what ASIC boost actually is, and like
Yeah,
what is this about? Here's what these people want to do. Here's what these people. I just wanted to explain things for people in a simple enough language.
sure.
And that surprisingly was enough to get a lot of people to read my work. So I started, explaining this on YouTube shows and stuff, the old World Crypto Network, and I became really good friends with Tone, and he started like for whatever reason when he and I were on a video together, like it would do like 5 times better than either of us doing it separately. So kept doing that, and sort of like culminated in August of 2017 when we had like one live stream that went for like 8 hours. And that
Wow.
was like when Bitcoin Cash was being put on the network, and we were watching and, commenting and all that. So, by then I think I had gotten a decent number of, Twitter followers, and I had always wanted to try something on my own. So I decided to go teach the program, how to program Bitcoin stuff. Um, and I had my first class, I think, in September of 2017, and I've done like 30 other classes
And you
and
wrote a
have
book,
taught over 500.
Programming Bitcoin. Well, so
Yeah, yeah.
forgive the naive question, but for those out there that are maybe new to the space, what does it mean when you say programming Bitcoin? Because I think
Mhm,
some of that, it's like the nomenclature and running a full node and being a miner. It's like, well, what
mhm.
does it mean when you're programming Bitcoin?
Yeah, so the Bitcoin is like a big protocol, right? Like it's gives you like when you send a transaction, when you send some Bitcoin from one person to another. If I sent you some Bitcoin, then I would have to the wallet software has to know how to construct that transaction and sign it properly with the private key and so on, and send it out to the network, and then the network picks it up and then and the miner may or may not include it into the next block, based on how much fees that I'm paying and so on. So that whole process, you like that's what I teach, right? Like it's here is what and like it turns out like learning what it means to digitally sign something is actually not trivia. It's actually quite complicated, and it
Uh-huh.
requires a lot of math. So this is sort of like going back to my original days of wanting to be a math professor. Like the first like 4 hours of my lecture are here is the math behind everything, and here's what it actually means to go sign something digital. Um, and here's why you don't actually reveal your secret when you sign this, and instead, the people verifying know that you know the secret, but you don't actually reveal it, which is kind of like mind blowing.
Yeah.
At least for me, every time I still think about it, it's like this is like magic or voodoo or something. Uh, I teach all that, and like what how to construct the transaction, how to, what all the fields in it are, what a block looks like, what pay to script hash is, and multi-sig, and what proof of work is, and how you calculate that, and how you verify that, and how to communicate things over the network, and so on. So these are all just sort of like primitives that you need to know in order to program something in Bitcoin. So this could be a wallet or a block explorer or anything. You need to know all of the sort of primitives within Bitcoin, and that's what I teach.
So going back to kind of where we're at in this country, and obviously now it seems like for a lot of Bitcoiners, they're presenting this idea of hope that, hey, we can reclaim free market and a sense of maybe even equality, because if you work hard and you have sound money, you can actually make a better future for your family by creating some generational wealth. What was I going to ask?
Let me just sort of answer what I think you're asking, which is that how is this going to change sort of like the day-to-day life of various people, and so on. Well, so Bitcoin is savings technology. Right now, we don't have very good savings technology. It's very hard to save. And even if you save in, stocks or real estate or something that's going up reasonably fast, you're never really going to save enough to catch up.
Yeah.
Money is expanding just way too fast. So the M2 money supply went from 15.5 trillion to 19.5 trillion last year. That's an increase of like 30% or more in a single year. Even if your stock went up, 25%, you lost ground versus the dollar because it expanded more than what you were able to save. Whereas with Bitcoin, you can actually save. So if you put a little bit of your paycheck into Bitcoin and like use that as your savings going forward, now you can actually own a home. And this is a very far cry from the current system, which is entirely debt-based. And debt-based systems are, I think, really corrupting to human character, especially debt-based systems where the debt comes out of nothing, like we have in the current system. So if you want to buy a house right now, what you do is you go get a loan and pay a down payment and you get the house, and you're enslaved for the next 30 years and you have to continually pay it off. That's a very, I think, like traditional, fiat money model. Whereas the Bitcoin model would be, well, you just start saving today, right? Some amount of money towards a house that you might want, and you keep accumulating. And the nice thing is, whatever Bitcoin you bought, it's compounding on itself, and because it's scarce, you're able to accumulate more and more relative to how far how long ago you actually started saving. So as a result of that, you get way more money. And when you have enough, now you can actually just sort of buy it with cash, which is how people used to do everything until the advent of the central banks and so on, where it was all about loans. And I think that's better for people because you have this ability to like strive after a goal instead of, hey, let's get whatever my whimsy is now and then be a slave. That tends to make people a lot more bitter. Whereas if you work for something and get it, that gives them a sense of joy and triumph and so on.
So I know you talk a lot about the altcoins and why you don't believe in them. So can you kind of convey that message on here and update me on you have a $500,000 bet with the Ethereum co-founder, don't you? that it's going to be Bitcoin, not Ethereum.
Well, he never really finalized the bet. He's been a weasel the entire time. So I wouldn't say that that bet's really outstanding. But yeah, I don't believe in altcoins because they are all centralized. And that's sort of the killer feature of Bitcoin, is that it's decentralized, that you have self-sovereignty over your coins, that you don't have a single point of failure. You don't have anybody that could take it away. Whereas with the Ethereum, it's clearly centralized. They took money away from like the DAO and so on. And they have all sorts of vulnerabilities on their platform. I'm sure they'll do some sort of bailout again at some point. So like having that single point of failure means that it's really no different than fiat currency. Whereas Bitcoin, you actually really get to own your own property. And those are those are completely different categories in my mind. And with Bitcoin, this is something that you desperately need, right? Like, because if you're saving, well, what other savings vehicles are there? Bitcoin is it, as far as I'm concerned. But like all of these other use cases for altcoins, right? Like, we need a way to do decentralized bets or something. It's like, no, that's not something you need. That's something that's maybe fun, convenient, something like that. But it's not something you desperately need. No one desperately needs to go and make like a bet on like a basketball game tomorrow or something like that. That doesn't make any sense. So for me, altcoins are all speculative, and I've written articles on
Yeah.
this like many times. Essentially, altcoins thrive off of marketing. There's like a lot of them are open source. If it was about the technical merits, you can just clone the freaking repository tomorrow and launch it without any pre-mine or whatever. But nobody does that because it's all about marketing, and you can duplicate the code, but you're not going to be able to duplicate all the marketing dollars that have been spent on Ethereum. Ethereum and Ethereum Classic essentially have the same platform,
Yeah.
but nobody's on Ethereum Classic because that's sort of like sloppy seconds or something. I don't know. Like, people just don't like it.
Well, based on our conversation, it seems like you're very confident that Bitcoin is really gaining momentum in terms of mainstream adoption and awareness and all that. But I have to ask out of curiosity, because having attended the Bitcoin conference, it was such an amazing event. And I was so excited to be around so many like-minded people and hear from the panelists, including you. I loved your panel on morality, and I'm actually going to ask you to summarize some of those points. But what I am curious about is I looked around and there were not a ton of women, and not a ton of minorities. And it feels like the message isn't necessarily getting across to, at least from my perspective, like women, we have so much of the spending power in the United States. And I looked around me and it was like, wow, there's not a lot of us. So, one of the things I want to do is I want to help in that area, because I do think that there's a lot of hope that Bitcoin does provide. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I mean, do you see this as sort of male dominated and white male dominated? And do you, as an Asian man, want to bring in more people as well, the Asian Americans?
Well, I mean, it's always been like that in Bitcoin. It is very heavily male dominated. I don't know if it's really white male dominated per se. I don't know. I've never felt like a minority really in any place that I've gone or anything. But that said, like, I have noticed a change in about the last year or so. A lot more women have been coming in, and I was wondering what was going on, because if you go on Twitter, for example, it's literally 95% men. Like, there's like very few women at all. And I could kind of understand it, because like people are just nasty to each other on Twitter, and you have to have like thick skin, and like, it's just not a pleasant place to be in.
Sure.
So I don't blame a lot of the women for not being on there. But what I have noticed is that with Clubhouse, ratio is a lot higher. It's instead of 20 to 1, it's maybe like 2.5 to 1. There's a lot of women on Clubhouse talking about Bitcoin and so on, and a lot of them are fairly new, and they're like, yeah, I like getting to talk to people. For whatever reason, it seems to have appealed a lot more to women to sort of like talk about it and have a conversation about it, instead of like 288 character sound bites or something like that. And a lot of those people came to Bitcoin 2021, and I saw a lot more of them. Believe me, like, it might seem very heavily masculine, but it, like, compared to other conferences that I've been to, it's actually pretty, like, it's significantly better ratio than I've seen. Like, I've been to conferences where it was like 6 women and like 300 people, right? Like, and it's like, okay, that's what happened. But this one, I feel like it was a significantly more people, and it's really more about what appeals to them. and like what the programs are and stuff like that. There
Sure.
are sort of like, or at least were, conferences geared specifically towards women and so on, and where majority of the speakers would be women and stuff like that. But if that appeals to them, then great. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it really depends on the market. And the thing is, not that many people are paying attention to that market. But if you have good ideas to appeal to them and can get them to come and stuff, you can also make a lot of money. So it's an opportunity. And yeah, I would like to see more people get into Bitcoin, period. So,
Yeah.
if you can figure it out, that's awesome. Go for it. And, let me know how I can help.
Well, I appreciate you, the Bitcoin boys, being welcoming to a new Bitcoin girl in the space. So thank you. Before we start to wrap up, I really, truly loved your panel in Miami. You were with Robert Breedlove and Guy Hirsch, and you had a panel about Bitcoin and morality. And I thought that some of the points you made were so profound. So, I know you spoke for a while, but if you could kind of summarize the crux of what you were trying to convey, just for people that maybe didn't get a chance to listen online or weren't at the conference, talk to me about Bitcoin and morality.
Yeah, it's more about the current system's immorality than Bitcoin's morality, although they're obviously related. So the current system is highly, highly immoral because of the existence of money printer. It means that there's essentially a bureaucracy that has this giant moral hazard, and they take advantage of that moral hazard to enrich themselves, their cronies, their friends, and whatever. And that could be very bad. And we've seen a lot of that, where a lot of people seem to get ahead in this world without contributing much of anything at all. Like, what's the most popular profession right out of college for like the best and the brightest today, right? Like Harvard, Stanford, MIT, whatever. Where are they going? They're going to investment banks.
Wall Street.
Yeah. And is it because they have such a passion for investment banking? No, it's because that's where they can go make money. And they know as well as we do that that's where all the money printing is happening, is at that investment banking level. And they are able to get enormous bonuses and make tremendous amounts of money without really adding much. And that's what the current system in a nutshell is all about. It doesn't reward people that are creating goods and services. It's rewarding people that know how to get close to the money printer and sort of rent seek off of that freshly printed money and doing things that way. Which is horribly unjust if you think about it. The people that suffer the most in that sort of system are the people that are absolutely the furthest from the money. You and I are in the U.S., so it's relatively, we're still relatively well off because the money trickles to us faster than, say, somebody in a third world country. So if you're in Venezuela or Nigeria or North Korea, you're the absolute last people to spend the newly printed money, and by the time you get to spend it, it is diluted like crazy, and you have less purchasing power, and you've effectively been stolen from. And that's the real immorality of the current monetary system, is that every time there is dollar expansion, the poorest people in the world are the ones that are being stolen from. And it's not just when the Fed does it. It's also when companies do it. It's when an investment bank does it. It's when we do it. When we take out a mortgage or, use a credit card or whatever. It's all of that is expanding the money supply, because all of those are debts created ex nihilo. So as a result, what we get is a very unfair system where poor people get screwed everywhere, and the Cantillon insiders get a lot of the benefit. Whereas with Bitcoin, you don't have a money printer, and so that means it's a lot more fair, and you don't have these very lucrative rent-seeking jobs that everyone that's smart enough kind of takes advantage of. Instead, we have people that are motivated to go create goods and services for everybody else, and that builds up civilization. So that's why I say that Bitcoin is a much more moral money.
If you were able to broadcast to, the entire world, maybe it was 30 seconds or a little bit longer, just your kind of elevator pitch, what you want everyone to know about Bitcoin, what would you say if you had that massive audience?
It's a good question. Well, it depends on like who would be in my audience. It could be like a bunch of 10-year-olds or a bunch of 60-year-olds.
The
I would
world.
have probably different messages.
The world is watching.
The world is watching. All right, I would probably say something like the current system is a cesspool of theft, and I can prove it to you. And here is an alternative that is theft proof, essentially. And no systematic, hand in a cookie jar, moral hazard kind of system. And that's why this is superior. I think a lot of people get that. And go based on that. I've written books about this, so I would try to refer them to that. So, yeah.
And I will too. And just last question, just for fun, tell me about the hat. Why the hat? What sparked that? And why do you why is it meaningful to you?
Yeah. So I started wearing the hat back in 2017. And it was in part because I would go to conferences and I would, I would be wearing my cowboy boots and everything. And people would ask, "Hey, where you from?" And I would be like, "Oh, Texas. Check out the boots." And
Yeah.
like, "Oh, okay." So I was like, I bet you if I wore a hat, people would be more turned on to the fact that I am from Texas. So I started wearing Stetson straw hat. I remember the first conference where I did that was, I think it was Consensus Invest 2017. And Pete Rizzo made fun of me the entire time. It's like, I can't believe you're wearing that hat, dude. So, but the reason why I wear the hat is, one, because I'm from Texas, and that's a big part of it. And two, it's because for me, Bitcoin is like the Wild West. It's it's got a lot of danger, but it's also got a lot of opportunity, and it requires some navigation. And for me, when I wear the hat, it's telling people, hey, you know what? Like, this is like, there's a lot of opportunity here, but you don't want to get trapped in altcoins or whatever. You want to navigate the place the right way. And also, I love that 1800s period. The phrase back then was "Go West, young man. Go West, young man." Now, what did that mean? Back then, you would train as a baker or something, and you would try to open up your own store. Except the guy that you just apprenticed with has been a baker for 30 years, and you're not going to get much business away from the other baker, right? And he could probably do it better and everything else. So what they would tell these young men that would just be out of training or apprenticeship or whatever is, "Go west, young man, go west." And why would they do that? Well, because there's like nothing out. there's plenty of customers, but not enough professionals. So go west, and you will find some opportunity. And that's what they did. And at the beginning, it was like Ohio and Michigan and places like that, but it kept going further and further west, to the point where like that was sort of like the thing to do, to make sure that you're not competing with all the old guard on the East Coast. You would just go west in order to establish yourself, essentially. And that was really good advice, because if you were a lawyer and you went out west, well, you suddenly became like that one lawyer in the West, and you would know all of the different laws related to westward expansion and all this other stuff, and you gain a lot of experience, gain a lot of money, and it would be very good for you. So for me, the hat represents that spirit of going west, and Bitcoin is very much the West. It's there. If you are an accountant, you could compete against like accountants that have been accountants for like 40 years, in the traditional realm, or you can go into Bitcoin and you're one of like 10 people, right? Like that know what the hell you're talking about within
Yeah.
Bitcoin tax accounting or whatever. If you're, an artist, right? Like plenty of Bitcoin artists too, right? Like that, you're selling to like a different segment and so on. Pretty much any profession, you can probably find some overlap with Bitcoin and serve the Bitcoin community. And there's a lot of us that have some money and that want services and goods. So this hat represents that opportunity that Bitcoin has, and the ability for a lot of people to find something new and a niche, and like contribute and build this whole thing up.
I love that. That's awesome. Your digital gold rush hat. That's awesome.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Coin Stories. I'd love to connect with you if you have questions or guest requests, so feel free to get in touch on Twitter @NatBrunell or Instagram @NatalieBrunell. Take care till next time.